Hey guys, after filming the EDC video, I wanted to do a video on my grandfather's EDC. Now the stuff you see here didn't belong to my grandfather, but what I did was kind of recreated his EDC based on just stuff I owned, and wanted to show you what he had, what he did, you know, and how it kind of compares to modern times. Now before we even get into this, I just got to say, my grandfather, he's been dead probably about 13, 14 years now. And he was a perpetual tinkerer. You know, the man just couldn't go by a nut or a bolt or a screw without checking to make sure it was tight. He had to tinker with everything. He never sat still. He was always doing stuff. He never watched TV. He was always building things and making things. He fixed everything. He didn't throw anything away. Very typical of an older, you know, a person who, you know, a World War II vet. My grandfather was a World War II vet. He did a lot in his life, and so let's talk a little bit about EDC. Now, from an early age, I don't remember paying attention to the stuff he carried until I was a teenager, and so by then you're talking probably about the 1990s. Now, another thing I gotta preface and say is my grandfather didn't buy high-end gear. He typically bought, you know, kind of cheap hardware store stuff, a lot of stuff made in Pakistan, you know, that kind of stuff. Nothing amazing quality, so I just wanted to put that out there before we began. So he always carried a pocket knife and a leather sheath, and it was always a lockback. Well, they didn't have knives like they had back then. And it was probably, if I remember right, like a $1.10 or a $1.110 clone. So this one here is an Imperial, just a cheapo, I had from when I was a kid actually, but he carried something about this size in a leather sheath on his belt. He carried a TL-29 electrician's knife on his key ring. I remember that. He used to always pull that thing out. He had that thing out more than, like any time during a given day. He probably used that thing 30 times a day to check every screw he saw to make sure it was tight. No matter how many times he checked it that day, he just had to keep, you know, must have been OCD, but he also carried a Zippo in a leather pouch. Probably his military issue. After he died, it's something that disappeared relatively quickly. So I'm guessing it might have been something he had in the military. He never smoked. So I do believe it's something he had with him since then. Maybe a gift, who knows, but, you know, it was 15 years ago. I wish I had more time to ask him questions, but, you know, that's gone now. I do remember in the 90s him having a multi-tool that he also carried in a leather sheath. It was a cheapo. It didn't have much to it. It definitely was not a Leatherman. It was probably a knockoff of the PST. But I just remember it was pretty cheap, and it didn't work very good. And I think he broke the blade on it. You know, I think I remember the blade was broken in half. But he carried a small multi-tool. My grandfather had a love affair with small screwdrivers. There was not a miniature screwdriver that this man would not put in his pocket. Now, he wore glasses, and he had one of those kind of hard leather eyeglass cases. And he, during the day, would store tools in that case rather than his glasses. So you would open up his case, and he'd have little tiny screwdrivers, you know, kind of stuff like this. All kinds of little, like 4 or 5 little screwdrivers, precision screwdrivers, you name it, like the little eyeglass screwdrivers, and his whole eyeglass case was just full of them. Because what he loved, he loved little screwdrivers. Like I said, he would walk by an outlet and he would have to check that screw and make sure it was tight. If, you know, he came over to the house and he saw your toys, he'd always be checking to make sure the battery compartments were tight. You know, just weird dude. So he had a love affair with small screwdrivers, just anyone he had. And he would kind of rotate through a bunch of them, and he would always carry them in that little eyeglass case. And he always wore a Dickies work shirt and Dickies pants every day of his life. He had like 20 of them. You know, the blue, just very what you would see a mechanic wear. He wasn't even a mechanic, but he'd wear that blue Dickies outfit every single day with a white undershirt. He had he had a bandana. He always kept a bandana in his back pocket. And so he had that front pocket with his glasses case that always was filled with little screwdrivers. And in there also was nail clippers. The man always had nail clippers. He took really good care of his nails. He was you know, he was a perpetual tinkerer, so his hands were always dirty. So he always kept his fingernails really short, you know, because that way he wouldn't be getting grime and gunk and stuff like that. I remember him carrying a very small flashlight. And this is the closest thing I have to what I remember. It was just a small little keychain flashlight. It didn't put out much light at all, but it was something he'd use, you know, once in a blue moon. And I think he had it attached to his TL29, if I remember right. But he did. He carried a little tiny flashlight, and also in his shirt pocket, he also carried 2 sets of pliers. One was a wire cutter, and one was a small set of like needle nose pliers that he carried in his shirt pocket just behind the eyeglass case. And oftentimes what he would do is take rubber bands, and he would put rubber bands around the case and rubber band the pliers to the eyeglass case. And same thing, he used them quite a bit. It's like it wasn't a day. Rarely an hour would go by where you wouldn't see this man pull one of the tools he had out and use it for something, because he didn't sit still. He was always messing with everything. That's the best way to describe it. So he always carried a little pair of like little wire snippers, which he used to use for like everything. Like if you walked by and like the trim on the window had maybe like a brad nail that was sticking out a little bit, he would use that wire cutter and try and trim that nail down a little bit so it would flush. You know, same thing. He was always picking at things with pliers and with his cutters, and so he had a pair. And I think this red pair belonged to him. I can't remember. It's been so long, you're talking 15 years now, but it's like a made in Pakistan, which is very kind of similar to what he would buy. And I do remember him having a red handle pair of pliers that were always in that shirt pocket of his. So I think they're his. I can't remember. So that's it. That was his EDC. You know, his world was messing around with stuff, and it kind of shows in that he had a lot of tools. He had a lot of little tools. Very little on his keys. You know, he had probably just car key and a house key, and that was it, along with his TL29, and I think the little flashlight. You know, a knife, a multi-tool, and the Zippo on his belt, and the rest of the stuff in his eyeglass case and shirt pocket. Very simple, very kind of utilitarian, but it was kind of cool, and just wanted to share how times have changed and how things are different now, and what people carry and what they don't anymore.